Hi, and welcome to episode number 29 of Self-Help SatNav, the podcast show where we talk about the best self-help tools for getting the most out of your relationships, work, health, and well-being. I'm your host, Jim Lucas, behavioural therapist and specialist in well-being and evidence-based practices. For more information about the therapy, ebooks, online courses, and specialist ACT training and supervision we offer, head on over to www.openforwards.com. Today I'm speaking with a blog writer, an author, and founder of 365 Days of Compassion, which is an online global community of people sharing thoughts, reflections, and information about compassion and well-being. With a particular emphasis on compassion-focused therapy and compassionate mind training, this champion of self-compassion has created an amazing online space for people to come together to be open, vulnerable, and courageous. I first met him online a couple of years ago when he began sharing his blog posts about his experience of living with depression. We later got together to create and publish an ebook called The 5 Self-Compassionate Ways to Manage Depression and Boost Your Well-Being. I know he is a much respected human and contributed to the development of self-compassion worldwide. His name is Chris Winson. Hello, Chris.
Hi, Joe.
Thanks for joining me today on Self-Help SatNav.
Thank you very much for the invite. Looking forward to it.
It's great to have you on. And as usual, we're going to kick straight off with the first question, which is, what's an example of a self-help tool that you've put to use in your own life?
So, the most useful self-help tool I think that I've used is self-compassion and developing a more compassionate approach to mental well-being and life in general. Now, that might sound like I wasn't a particularly compassionate person before I started to learn that, but I think, as we'll hopefully talk about during the podcast, there is quite a power within developing a slightly more compassionate approach to our own thinking. We all tend to be fairly critical, and unfortunately, that can lead to some mental health, trouble thinking, and it can cause a lot of distress in our lives.
Yes, completely understand that. Self-compassion is a term that I guess kind of you and I are probably quite familiar with now, but I wonder whether quite a lot of people listening haven't really kind of been around that terminology much. And I wonder if you could elaborate on what that is, what it looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's an interesting point in terms of our terminology. Obviously, within the podcast, you've talked a lot around different things, compassion as we are today, values, acceptance. These are all can be seen as big words with a lot of connotations for different people because of cultural and society influences. For me, perhaps if I answer your question by just sharing a little bit about my journey into the compassion world. So, I basically towards the end of 2016, things had become quite dark for me. I'd had periods of kind of depression on and off before that, but it had been very successful at hiding that. Probably should deserve an Oscar at some point for being able to do that. By the end of 2016, towards the end of 2016, that was quite obvious that was not sustainable, and I eventually went and did what I should have done beforehand, which is to go and sought some help. And part of that help was being referred on to for talking therapy. And I fortunately chose a therapist who knew something called compassion-focused therapy, which at the time, obviously, I had no idea about. I was just coming along to undertake a therapeutic approach to see if that would help. And there were certain elements of that approach that really helped. And we can talk about why they help in a moment. But what they really helped was that they started to explain certain behaviours and thinking patterns for me that weren't helpful alongside the period of depression. And one of the key things within that was exploring this concept, as you said, of self-compassion. And for me, my take on self-compassion is that it's changing your kind of inner critic to an inner supporter. So it's we if you have a friend who is struggling, most of us would respond in a compassionate way. We wouldn't particularly judge that person for what they were struggling with. We might look to help them. We might just sit with them while they experience whatever distress or pain that it is. With ourselves, that's a very different relationship. And I think we tend to be much more critical, much more judgmental, and way a lot harder on ourselves than we are with other people.
Yep, I agree with that.
And I think there are different reasons for that. One of the things that I liked about CFT was that it explains that in a kind of scientific way around the evolution, development of the brain, why certain behaviours worked in our past, in our history, but aren't as conducive to modern life. And modern life itself doesn't help with that kind of non-judgmental piece. Social media, there's the continual thing about continuous improvement in your life, etc. And I think there are expectations, and amongst all of that, I think we lose something with the relationship with ourselves. And I think that, for me, is where self-compassion comes in. I think one thing I ought to completely stress here is that self-compassion isn't easy, nor should it be kind of lumped into the kind of unfortunately superficial way that self-care is seen. There's a lot of, we have to be careful with words like self-care, where it's not just about sitting down and I'm tired, I won't do something. It's actually being slightly more clear about what you need to do to look after yourself. And the other piece I think is not easy about the self-compassion is that actually it encourages you to look at all of you. So all of those parts of you that, so maybe your anger or your impatience or those moments when you get frustrated, those are the kind of emotions sometimes we push away and they fester. Whereas compassion tends to allow you to be a bit more encompassing of all of those emotions.
Okay. There's some things that you said there that are really kind of standing out to me. That for you, self-compassion is about turning your inner critic into a supporter.
So that's a big one for me, and I think a lot of people suffer with quite severe criticism, and that can be driven by many things. Sometimes you think, oh, if I'm not, if that's part of my drive, that's part of me. If I don't do that, then I won't be able to, go on to do something. Even if that's going to the gym. I need to go to the gym today. I'm feeling great. Oh, look, you could excuse, and you start to beat yourself up. That isn't going to help with the encouragement of going to the gym, particularly when it's a cold, frosty morning. So to me, that piece of saying, well, actually, rather than criticizing that part, actually, can you encourage you to? So it's a little bit of a different conversation to yourself. So yes, it is cold. Yes, you don't feel like it, but actually, one of your values perhaps is to stay healthy for your family, for yourself. That then gives you motivation, and I think the internal encouragement, rather than berating yourself for not going to the gym, may help you go to the gym. It might actually explain, if you are tired, why are you tired, and it just brings a little bit more, for me, clarity around motivation. And it is difficult, I think, for people, particularly in the intense periods of depression. That's quite a hard thing to do, to change that, because I think depression amplifies that inner critic. But this is one of those key things one of the key things for me that came out from learning about compassion focused therapy. I've just mentioned the word drive. CFT was developed by Professor Paul Gilbert. Paul developed an idea of these three emotional systems. So you've got your drive, threat, and soothing. And those three systems kind of work together. However, in a lot of instances, one or two may be more dominant, and they can also move into unhealthy positions. So drive is good. I will confess that during therapy I struggled with this, because I found that, to me, drive has connotations of go-getting and so on. But we all have a healthy drive to go to the gym. But then if your drive gets pushed, for example, you decide that you've got a load of work to do and you're going to carry on working throughout the night to catch up on emails or whatever, your drive may there be into a more unhealthy position. And the threat system is one that really is triggered quite a lot. You know, we all get very nervous, and I'm slightly nervous about doing this podcast. And again, evolutionary has helped us to develop that threat system, but it can go unchecked, and we can become, constrained by the feelings that brings. So this is where the self-compassion piece comes in, and with the soothing system, that can help to kind of calm. I would say calm, actually, because I need to be careful with that. It's not always about calming; it's about bringing some clarity to what's happening.
Okay.
Calm would suggest you bring your threat all the way down and you bring your drive down, and I think I want to be careful with the words there, because there's a healthy drive, and there is always, of course, a healthy threat level. You need to be aware of this, and a little bit of anxiety, perhaps before doing this podcast, is showing that it's important to me. For me, the soothing piece, the compassionate piece, keeps that at a healthy and helpful level, not unhealthy.
So it can keep you in the zone, the right zone of what's helpful and useful threat to pay attention.
I think it's keeping those kind of three. They're usually drawn as circles. Those kind of three circles. For me, obviously, in different contexts, different situations, one might be slightly bigger than the other, and so on. I think broadly, you're trying to keep those supporting each other. You don't want your threat system to be this great big red circle and drive a smaller one, and the compassion soothing one a little dot. It's that would show where it's out of kilter. So I think it's also about keeping that. So like you said, zone, keeping those working together in a good way for you as a person.
Yes. So it's a useful tool. It's one. And it's one that you're saying is it's difficult probably for a lot of us because of our evolution and our history. It's difficult because of lots of things in the modern world going on around us, social media, cultural norms about achieving a lot. And also then if you're struggling, if your mood is really low day in, day out, then it becomes even harder with that as well.
Yeah, and I think absolutely, and I think the way that there is a definition of compassion that Paul Gilbert has used, where compassion is a motivation, and that's an interesting way to think about it. So it's a motivation towards noticing distress. So that can be distress within yourself, and obviously noticing it within others. With then the desire to work to alleviate that if you can. I think that's an important piece there, because sometimes there are difficult emotions that you will feel, and often we can look at different ways of ignoring it or dulling it, avoidance. But actually, what compassion is kind of saying there as a motivation, actually going to acknowledge that distress. You may not be able to do anything about it at that point, but actually noticing it, sitting with it is helpful, and that's why it's not necessarily a easy thing, and that can take a lot of courage, and it can be very hard to do. And it takes some time to develop as well. I don't think the thing that I'm certainly learning, from the 2 years of my experience so far, each, I make mistakes. I don't always follow the things I've just said. But the other piece that compassion brings to me is to not necessarily judge myself too harshly for that, but to actually say, why did that old habit, or why did that old style of thinking come back? So it's not also letting yourself off the hook. It's just actually being more curious about why that happened.
Yeah, that's a nice phrase. Being curious about what happened, rather than just doing what you think might be like what's a nice thing to do for yourself in the moment.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, indeed. And I think the other thing that really helps is not just the words, but I actually learned this from one of your earlier podcasts with the wonderful Dr. Mary Welford. It's also about the tone that you say it. So something I initially, when I was kind of working with Nikki, who was my therapist around this, was it was very hard for me to try and change the words. And if you make a mistake, you start to tell yourself off, if you like. To try and catch yourself at that point and switch the words is quite a step. And I think Mary talked on the podcast about, well, another step is to actually change the tone first of all. So you might not change the words, but you change the tone. She does the wonderful example, which I have seen her do live now, and it's a great example, where she's looking for her car keys. And you've either got the choice of looking for the car keys, telling yourself off, oh, you idiot, where did I put them, in a harsh way, or if you just change that tone to a more humorous way, it does make a difference.
Yeah, it changes the impact completely.
It does. And I think that was a wonderful little tip that I picked up from this very podcast.
Yes. I'm glad you've been a listener for a long time, because I think I interviewed Mary probably over a year ago now.
It was quite early on in my kind of experience, actually. So yeah, so it would have been it must be over a year at least.
Yeah, and I think the things that we're talking about here, about the way you can apply self-compassion to yourself, is tricky to do. But these things that you're bringing out, like the tone of your voice, turning your inner critic into a supporter, making me think about how I choose to, or how I aim to be with other people. So like as a parent, the way I want to talk to my children, as a boyfriend, how I want to talk to my girlfriend, how I want to talk to my friends, my parents, my siblings, people I meet through work, is that it's easier for me to connect with, that I would want, what compassion would be in those instances if I think about me towards somebody else. And actually, I found that really useful in terms of helping other people introduce self-compassion in their own lives. And then I get this feedback from it. It's like, yeah, well, that's how I can do it for myself, is where it reinforces what it looks like.
Totally. And that's some of the CFT exercises use use imagery. So there's a number of little practices around that. So one way that you can help is to consider, what does a compassionate person look like? And for different people, that can be, you can sometimes work with people to say, who in the public eye do you see as a compassionate person, or what are the attributes of a compassionate person? So like you say, you start to then say, well, that's what a compassionate friend would look like to me. So what are those kind of attributes I could perhaps use? Or I think that's a very useful exercise, because again, compassion comes with so many connotations for different people. I think just thinking about it in that way really does help.
And I'm drawing a line under something I've written down that you mentioned earlier as well, which was reconnecting with myself. Self-compassion has been a tool for that.
Yes, it has, because I think there is a lot of, I guess with many talking therapies, you do quite a lot of self-reflection, but I think because you're doing it in a more non-judgmental way, and you're doing it in a more encompassing way, so you're not trying to push away certain parts of, impatience, for example, and you're not pushing that away as not being part of your character, if you like, or the certain situations that comes up. I think you then go through a piece where you do reconnect with more of yourself in a slightly different way, because you've taken away some of that judgmental piece. You're not being as critical, and there are moments as you kind of go through, or I've certainly found as you kind of go through this, that little moments suddenly you realise how far that you've come along on that. I use imagery quite a lot, so one of the things that I did was to imagine I'm smiling because I've got several characters, but I imagined the inner critic as a bear. So there's this big, and I started to think, okay, so that's quite scary. So I called it Judge Bear, and so he sat there with his wig on and stuff. But then I started to kind of think, as my time developing more compassionate approach to that thinking, he had to start to get a little bow tie, which starts to bring a bit of humour into that part of it. And then it kind of went to a stage where actually it changes from a grizzly bear into more of a cuddly bear. And actually, therefore, what he's actually saying is helpful. It's not judgmental anymore. It's a supportive piece. That kind of sounds quite twee when I've just said that out loud, but that kind of imagery kind of does work for me. And I think maybe that illustrates that change from a critic to a supporter. Even if it's the same kind of voice, or your same thought pattern that's driving it.
Yes. So as we talk about this, it's making me think about how this is very relational, this practice of compassion, in the sense that we're talking about how we relate to ourselves as a human being. And then it makes me think that inevitably you then start to think about how you relate to other people.
Yeah.
And I know that you've become a champion, if that's a word that sits all right with you, of the practice of self-compassion.
Champion is a great interesting word. I could talk about it for hours. So it does. I mean, there's something else that perhaps I didn't mention within the CFT, which relates to this actually. That also there's a concept of three flows of compassion. So there's the flow to others, which majority of people, that is just something naturally that happens. The second one is the flow of compassion towards yourself, and actually that can be quite hard. So even praise you could lump within that. So you calling me a champion, for example, I can notice that I do wince at that a little bit, and I think sometimes it can be hard to receive compassion or kindness in that way. I often deflect with a joke, and then there's the flow towards yourself, the self-compassion, and they're all kind of connected, because I think so the first one, the compassion to others, most people, that's quite natural. I think as you develop self-compassion, it can be easy to receive compassion from others, so easy to seek help if you need it, easy to be more vulnerable. When I first started the sessions with Nikki, I wouldn't say the word depression, because there were so many barriers to saying that, and now I'm quite happily talk about it, and I'm quite happy to put myself into to open up about that vulnerability. But then the compassion to others is interesting, because I think you also develop a little bit more around that as you develop self-compassion. I think because you might see there is some distress there, and your initial thing might be to go and help, but actually you might not be the right person to go and help. You might need to signpost somebody to go to seek professional help, perhaps, to see a therapist or to go and see their GP. And I think it just gives you a little bit more clarity to how you will react to that situation. So coming back to your question, though, yes, CFT made a difference to me. And what I would say is I had a very, I think I had a very good therapeutic experience, mainly because actually, although Nikki used CFT with me, she also blended it with other elements of ACT, for example. Never actually said, we're going to do CFT, we're going to do this. It was a combination of tools and things that helped me as an individual. But CFT and compassion really just hooked something in my mind, and it made a lot of sense to my personal experience. And the other thing that happened was connection. So, it's quite a random set of connections, but Nikki knows yourself, so I think I connected with you, Rich Bennett, Joe Oliver. Through your podcast, I discovered Mary and also Ray Owen, because I also remember you did a very good podcast about values with Ray, which again just made big word values, but it really came across in a very, for me, made a lot of sense. And something else that Nikki had encouraged me, if I wanted to, I'd started to write about my experience, but only very privately to some friends, in a little mini blog on Facebook about the depression. And during one of the sessions, I think I'd done about 3 blogs. She said, have you ever thought about going public with the blogs? And then did one of those, I always like to do this, is one of those psychotherapy things, a little nudge, just left it there to kind of grow in my mind. And so, yeah, so then I started to do a public blog and write, and that was very kindly supported by yourself and others who shared it. The writing became very important to me, partly because I guess it also brought this creative side of me that seemed to have been hidden in my corporate career. And that just led on to a number of different connections. And then Mary, on social media, we'd all kind of started to connect. Did a thing in December 2017 where she did the Advent of Compassion, which was she's going to post something every day, just a little video, quote, whatever, as an Advent calendar. And halfway through December, I thought, this is a really good, a lot of people, we're really kind of getting onto it. It's a really great idea. And an idea came to my head that why don't we just do this for every day of the year? A little bit also taken from the Blurt Foundation, which is an online depression charity, who do 365 days of self-care. And so the hashtag 365 days of compassion was born. And the intention there was just simply, and remains simply really, to just have people post, if they want to, each day, something that's related to self-compassion, mental health. And that started off, and it kind of grew, really. And what's kind of grown around it, which is astounds me to this now, is that there's a kind of community grown around that, globally, connections. And what I love about that is, one, it's a great support piece. It's a very positive little part of social media. But there's a great blend of people in the community, your good self, there's the likes of Mary, the folks over in Australia, James Kirby, Stan Scheidel, and alongside all the non-professionals, if you like. I don't like to do that division between professionals and non-professionals, because I think the thing I really, really take from that community is the sharing that happens, and it's just a group of humans, basically, who are kind of around that.
It's great that those differences don't have to be things
100%.
that are like inclusive or exclusive.
Totally, and I think For me, that's just one of those things that I value so much about that. And it is a community where you can post and say, I'm really not having a great day today, and people will respond. And there's some great material that's shared from that. So that's kind of grown, and what we've done around it is that it's now on various different social platforms. There's also a Facebook group. For this year, for 19, it's gone onto Instagram as well, which seems to be working quite well. Quite a lot of people seem to have welcomed that.
Cool.
And I guess connected to that, towards the end of last year, we created a book club, which is an online book club. So we've reviewed, had 2 sessions last year with Mary, talking about her brilliant CFT for Dummies. We've got this month in January, we've got lined up a Compassionate Mind workbook with Dr. Chris Irons and Dr. Elaine Beaumont. We've got Dr. Lucy Maddox lined up in Feb for Blueprint. I'm hoping that in March I can line up, they have agreed this, I've just got to get the details, Eric Morris and Joe Oliver to talk about Activate Your Life, which was a book I found very helpful. And hopefully this year we'll get some folks like Professor Paul Gilbert onto it as well. Because that's the other thing that's happened around that community. It's connected to the Compassionate Mind Foundation as well, so which is Paul's charity set up around CFT, and so I'm hoping this year that we'll get even closer around that. And
yeah, it seems like a very important charity. What's that charity about?
So it was originally set up by Paul, and folks like Mary was involved, and Chris Irons and a few other people, in terms of setting a charity up to really promote compassion focused therapy. So it was very much aimed in that sphere to start off with. It has grown, so Paul and team are doing some work locally in Derbyshire with schools. That's connected to the University of Derby, where Paul is based. So they're doing some work with both the pupils and the staff, and I believe some of the parents as well, around, mindfulness, around this kind of more compassionate approach to thinking. They're also now starting to do work in the workplace. So I think it was last year was the first leadership conference that CMF had run. And they're starting to also kind of look at some things around society as well as continuing to develop the use of CFT to support a range of mental well-being and mental health issues. And the thing that I think is I welcome, being self-confessed, very analytical, is that this comes from a very much science-backed set of research. And that's still continuing. There's some great papers coming out around CFT supporting eating disorders. There's some work being done in Australia around that, supporting people with trauma, PTSD, continuing to grow, and continuing to understand a bit more about what is compassion as a motivation, and making sure that this does bring evidence-based benefits to people.
That's a really rounded kind of focus that they sound like they've got there, developing the interventions based on research, trying them out in different important contexts like schools, like workplaces, different problems that people might be struggling with. And I guess kind of hopefully then using their experiences and the data they gather then to inform the development of their interventions.
Absolutely, and it is a global piece. I've mentioned some of the folks over in the US. That's because Paul is connected to the University of Queensland over there, and there's some great work being done over there. There's some great work being done out in Greece as well. It's global, and of course within the US there is Dennis Tersch, who's also obviously very connected in the ACT world as well. And the work that he's been doing there around bringing that compassionate approach within the ACT piece, I think it's been fascinating. I was delighted to join a video call with some very interested psychology students in Peru the other day to talk about compassion, and because they'd heard about
Wow.
what Paul's doing. He is out in South America, I think, towards the end of this year again. So it is really a growing global community.
Yes. And so self-compassion then hasn't been a solo thing for you. It's not been something that you've just done in isolation from others. It's really been something that sounds like you started on your own, and then it's really grown into something with other people, those connections, those communities.
Yeah, that I've never thought of it in that way, actually. That's a very interesting question. Yes, it was very much a solo journey, because I wasn't, I guess, if you go back to December 16 and then into the February 17 when I first entered therapy, I very isolated then, I guess, in terms of not really talking about what was happening. And then I guess it was through that therapeutic journey, being encouraged to talk about it, really understanding that depression was serious, because I struggled with that to start off with, and then understanding these words like compassion, acceptance, values. Did go on a journey, and I also did MBCT towards the end of that, which was a group session, and that was very helpful. And then, as you say, then the kind of this online community piece came along. So yes, actually, I've never really thought of it like that. Yeah, it's kind of been like a funnel, I guess. It's kind of come out. Yeah. What I love about that, it's never been planned either. None of this was planned. That was something I really struggled with. I worked as a program manager, project manager, so I was used to plans, and it was something I struggled with when I was first diagnosed with depression. When I first started with therapy, I think one of the first questions to Nikki was, how many sessions we're going to have? When am I going to start to feel this type of thing? And nobody can answer those questions because it's an individual thing. And I struggled with that. So actually, I'm now relishing the fact that these things have kind of happened in a random way. The connections that have happened, they just have happened, and it's lovely.
Yeah, I bet it is, isn't it? And it makes me think about the communities that I'm part of, and how things that I try to do, things that I love, just would be a fraction of the pleasure, a fraction of the power, if it wasn't with other people.
Yes. And I know there's a lot of bad stories around on social media, and unfortunately, there are people who perhaps it just reflects some nature of some of the darker sides of human nature, perhaps. But the online community is a very supportive one, and I think if you are careful, particularly on something like Twitter, where it can get very heated and very aggressive in the tone that people take. I think if you're very careful and you select, and you can soon tell, and you connect with people, then it can be, a very positive experience, actually, and a very supportive one. You just have to kind of work at that, and just be careful who you kind of connect with sometimes.
Sure. Yes. Yeah. Particularly in the online world. Yes, that's a important thing, isn't it? It affects a lot of people, affects young people, I guess, as well, more and more. That's something that seems to be a problem that needs to be kind of worked on.
It is. I mean, one of the lovely things actually that came out from the community towards the end of last year, because obviously 2018 was the first year that we ran the whole 365, was that somebody referred to it as a safe harbour. Within this, sea of kind of social media. So that was Fiona, who's been a massive supporter of 365. I know you know Fiona, and that was just lovely to hear that, because and I've been very careful. I've taken a slightly compassionate approach to where I go on social media. I used to follow a lot of psychologists and so on. I've seen some of the very heated mental health discussions that sometimes happen on Twitter, and I decided that even though there were some people in there that I wanted to follow, in the end I was seeing too much of that, and it wasn't helpful for me. So I kind of stepped away from that, and I found that more beneficial.
Mm. Mm.
And the connection thing is very interesting because that's led on to other opportunities. Yeah, you very kindly supported me and achieve a bit of a dream of mine, which was to write a book. So we did the ebook, which was brilliant to write about. Probably covers some of the aspects that we've talked about today.
Yeah, so that we published that book last year, didn't we? It's an
We
ebook.
did, yeah.
It's called 5 Self-Compassionate Ways to Manage Your Depression and
Yeah.
Boost Your Well-Being, which you can find on www.openforwards.com/shop-ebooks.
Yeah, and that was another step on that kind of journey in terms of sharing stuff. But it was a great experience, that, actually.
Yeah, it was the first time that I'd partnered with somebody on producing something, and I loved the way that you wrote, and I loved the way that you brought in your own personal experience and your generosity in sharing that, and also that you were drawing in something that you thought would be useful for other people based on kind of some scientific underpinnings as well. So the combination of those things was really appealing, and I was really glad that we got that done and got that out there, and and people have been buying it. It's priced as $1.95. We donate half the money to the Compassionate Mind Foundation, and really pleased that we've done it.
Yeah, no, I've had a few messages about it, and that's just that's astounding as well. So but you mentioned there in terms of how much you share. I think I may have said it earlier, but I think that's the piece for me, particularly in a perhaps as a man, in terms of that we're not encouraged to sometimes, not expected to perhaps always talk about things. I think there's a certain openness that keeps it authentic. And I think without that, I can't really tell the story in the right way. For me, it's become actually quite a value to be actually open about certain things and to talk about that.
Yes. So people can find you on Twitter.
So they can find me. They can find me on Twitter. I have a very strange handle at Chizzy_98. It was a random nickname that I had when I was at work. It was a very long story and boring. So that's the Chizzy_98. Or they can also now find, we've got a dedicated for this year. I've set up a dedicated 365 Days of Compassion Twitter account.
Yeah.
And we've also got a separate 365 Days of Compassion book club account, which is specifically supporting those online chats that we have with authors.
Mm-hmm.
There's also the Facebook group, which is 365 Days of Compassion, and also just now onto Instagram, where we post the daily images. So I tend to create each day a daily piece of shared compassion quote that people have come out from. So I'm aiming to do those for the 365 days. So that's going to be good. So and supporting all of that are some blogs as well. So there's my own personal blog, which I'm not running as much in at the moment, but I occasionally still post stuff there. And we've got a community blog. So people are now writing blogs for the 365 Days of Compassion community. Great mixture on that of people sharing their own stories. So Sarah Rees, who I know you interviewed a couple of episodes ago, Sarah wrote a brilliant, very open, very personal blog on there about her own journey and using compassion within that, which is a highly recommended read. We've got some poetry on there as well, and
excellent.
Somebody just posted, we've just had a summary paper on there of a little bit of research, but written in a way that's accessible to outside of an academic type of world. So that's just gone out today. So I'm really pleased with how that's starting to kind of come together.
And the web address for that is?
So these are all on WordPress. So the web address for my own personal one is Breathe Underwater at WordPress. The book club is 365 Days of Compassion Book Club at WordPress, and then 365 Days of Compassion at WordPress. I can send you the links.
Yeah, we'll put them in the show notes as well, so
yeah.
people can just see them on the website.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I imagine there'll be some people out there that want to get involved in the book club, and so we can signpost them in that direction.
Please, I mean, the book club is totally open. We're doing it on Twitter at the moment. So we get the authors in. So we've had, I say, Mary last year. Great to just have an hour's chat. Very open questions about the book, about compassion focused therapy, which is brilliant. I say we've got authors lined up this year. We may try and do a Facebook Live, perhaps on that as well. I've had some requests for that because obviously not everyone's on Twitter. What I would say is about a few days after we've done the chat, I do try and capture all of the tweets into a blog so that even if people couldn't join us or they don't access Twitter, they can still see the conversations. So plenty of ways to access that as well.
Cool. I mean, that's great. That's lots of people to get into there. Thank you so much, Chris, for doing this. It's brilliant to have you on, and yeah, I reckon this would be a really good episode for people to listen to. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It's been a delight, and yeah, thank you.
See you.
Thanks, Jim. Cheers. Bye.